Players Pick Podcast, picks and perspective with Chris Johnson. Pool table. Painkiller.
Did you make this background here?
No, I got it from StarWars.com. They have like a whole bunch, man. So this is my default.
Dude, I love it, man.
Yeah.
Steve Jenkins on the podcast, dude. Man, I appreciate you joining me. I wish we could be doing it in person, of course, because we're just across goddamn town. But
yeah, and I know, man. It's like just good measure and keeping it safe. It's probably better to err on the side of caution, right? That's kind of what everyone's doing now.
Yeah, I don't have the budget that Rogan has to test every person that rolls through his podcast before they get on the mic, dude. Like, you see that shit? He tests every person that rolls through there. I don't know where he got all those tests, but
damn, that's more incentive to try to get on his show, I guess, man.
Yeah, I get that's right. Like, you know what? I can't get tested by my local spot. If I can get on Rogan, man, I'll just get a test. I'll know for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's cool. I know a lot of people like the high end podcast dudes. Like, I think Marin has people over, but I don't know if he's having them tested. But you know, it's like he's been making content. Like, he's been posting on his Instagram. Like, maybe it's just there's a way they can socially distance, and there's like a way to do it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, part of me feels like, if as long as your space is clean, you guys aren't touching, and you're distant in the room, like, it seems like, I don't know. I mean, that's still technically, not able to be infected, really, right? So
yeah, it's strange because I think there's a lot of stuff that's hasn't really been spelled out, like there hasn't really been, so it just leaves this huge blanket, everything's infected, don't touch it. So I think that's where people who are really cautious, like I'm one of the more cautious people. Like, I think about, okay, if I'm going on a supply run, where am I going to put all the stuff down, and have I disinfected that area? And then, like, if I'm going to wear gloves, what am I going to use to take off the gloves? And it's really kind of this elaborate thing. And my brain hurts after this, man. Like, that's the part that's really weird, is like all this stuff that you take for granted because you do it not really thinking. Like, when's the last time you thought about where your hands were, or like where your proximity was to another human being when you just went to get maybe like 5 things at a grocery store? And now it's like, it's weird. At least it's sort of one of those things where I think it's a shared experience. Like, I think a lot of people are all kind of in the same headspace. But it reminds me of when I quit smoking cigarettes, because smoking cigarettes is the kind of thing that attaches itself to so many things that you do without realizing it. So there was a period of time where, and I quit cold turkey, by the way. It was one of those things. I was living in Boston at the time, and it was like the dead of winter, which means it was really cold. And the house I was living in with some friends, we had a no cigarette smoking policy. Weed was okay, but not cigarettes. And it was the kind of thing where to go outside to smoke, you'd have to get, like bundled up and go outside. So I had quit at the very end of 2003. And, so I guess the thing that was really weird for a long time was driving, because I would light a cigarette. Then I had like a manual transmission car. And so I would shift gears, and I could like adjust the stereo and like, or, change the disc in the Discman that was plugged into the stereo. And the minute I took away smoking, it's like, I don't know how to do this anymore, And so it feels like that when I'm walking into a grocery store. It's like, do I need to wipe down this thing, or should I just wash my hands afterwards?
I 100% agree with you. It has been, which is an interesting thing, because it puts you much more in the present moment, right? Because you're not on autopilot. You're not just walking through and brushing elbows with people. You're not it's not that same world where you weren't really worried about it and you're just kind of thinking about something else while you're doing this thing. You got to stay more present and do this thing because there's health in risk, either yours or other people's. So yeah, I wouldn't say I'm the most cautious person, but I am pretty cautious. And I mean, like I go out and I have like a thing of Lysol wipes that I take with me, and I got some spray so that like as I'm going out, I can spray like a cart down, and take a couple wipes with me or whatever, and
Yeah.
then like I can spray stuff down and feel like I when I get back in the car and come back to the house that I'm not bringing anything with me, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then go through the process of wiping down certain groceries and stuff that I'm gonna, keep in the house. And
Yeah.
it's a strange awareness to be involved in, but the fact that it is heightening our awareness and bringing us a little bit more into the present
Mhm.
and reevaluating how we interact with each other, I think that's mostly a good thing.
Yeah. It's a good thing in some ways. It's just very it's scary for everybody right now because nobody's working in the ways that people need to be working. So there's like stress and all this and all that. But yeah, the greater good of why everyone's doing this right now. I mean, I hope I sometimes I kind of run the gamut of feelings about it because even though it's definitely staying in is not anywhere near as challenging as being a medical professional and all this. You know what I mean? So it's like
Right.
always got to frame it with that. But it's really weird, man. Like I'm finding myself as someone who I'm definitely an introvert, but I like to go out and see people. So, it's like now that we're in this place where you can't really do that. It's like, damn, I kind of need to go out and see people. So it's been weird trying to figure out how to like build sort of the reality of where we are today. But I've been keeping my routine for the most part, and I think that's been helping me out a lot. That's been kind of making this whole thing bearable. What have you been doing, man? Like how's it been on your end? Otherwise, you
Man, well, I'll say my very first couple days of like when things hit, I was like gung ho. I was like, oh, I'm just gonna be super Mr. Positive. I'm gonna do yoga every day. I'm gonna offer live streams. I'm just gonna do my best to be of service.
Mhm.
And then like I don't know, 3 or 4 days in, like I got news that my hours were cut half, and my pay is cut half for the time being. I'm secure with Kiesel and no problems there. Jeff and I are great, but they're at a reduced rate. Thankfully, we're still open. Like we're still making guitars. Like a lot of people aren't open and doing what we're doing
Mhm.
um, because of that particular city's ordinance and all that stuff. And the way that Jeff has been kind of working around things. And anybody that doesn't want to work, doesn't feel safe, doesn't have to, obviously. But when I got that news, and then just more and more like onslaught of media, just like how crazy, I just hit a wall, and I was like, oh man. And I just kind of sat around for like a week and a half, like just kind of tripping on everything a little bit. Just had I was just okay. Well, I'm going to isolate. I'm going to be here, but I just didn't know exactly how to, like you're saying, it's hard to kind of sort out like who am I or what am I supposed to do? What is the healthiest thing? Should I be more scared than I am, or am I already overreacting? Like I'm not quite sure.
Yeah.
Um, so yoga's definitely been a part of it. It's a big part of my life anyway, but like I kind of slacked off on it, and but then it was like after a week and a half of being home, I was so thankful. Some older students from the North Bay hit me up, and they're like, hey, we really would like to have you as a featured teacher on our online streaming thing.
Oh, that's cool.
And I was like, oh yeah, give me some purpose, man. Give me something to do, to like aim towards. And then all of a sudden, like the last last week and a half, 2 weeks, my vibration is raised more because I've had purpose. I've had a sense of like, okay, people do want to interact. People, even if we can't hang out in person, there is a thing happening here, and it's not the way we would prefer it, but it's better than not doing it at all, right?
Oh yeah.
So between that and kicking up the podcast like this, it's made me feel a lot better. This is the fourth one I've done like this, and I'm just so thankful, like for folks that are like, yeah, man, I got time. Let's just hang and kick it and
Yeah.
talk about the stuff, and it lifts my spirits, and then we get to, you know, obviously share it with people that are interested. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I started one just probably, for myself as much as just anything else, just to give myself an excuse to talk to people and work on something. And it's something that I always wanted to do. Me and the person who was my first guest, Matt Rubano, who's a great bass player friend of mine that I've known for years, we had an idea to do a podcast before all this. So I would hope when all this is over, we'll probably figure that out. But in the meantime, I'm hoping this will just be a thing that happens while everything's kind of stopped, and because I don't think anybody really is gonna document this side of it except us, and it's interesting to hear, like, because I mean, I don't really know, like, what it's weird. I've been wanting to read about, like, the pandemic of 1918, and how it lasted to like 1920. Like, I wanted to hear about that and read about it, and I'm curious to read about it more, because one interesting thing that happened after that was the Roaring Twenties, and so I'm wondering, there's like a lot of interesting things. Like, I'm wondering, like, what people were thinking about, what artists were thinking about, or people to create, and whether or not it was like just a minor disturbance in routine, or if it was like a catalyst for an entirely different way of doing stuff. And I don't know, because I think in a weird way we have a lot of mechanisms that have sort of kept some normalcy, because people can still record music, people can still find a way to, like, reach out to people to record music, and then people know how to combine stuff. So it's not like we're left with nothing to do. But I don't know. I think by and large, just the discussions that people are having and the openness of just talking about it, I really think, there's probably other professions where people are having the same types of issues. Like, I'm sure no movies are really getting made right now, and everything's kind of stopped. So, but, there's no better way to document it from the perspective of the people who are in that realm. So,
Right.
it's kind of cool to hear, at least from a solidarity standpoint, everybody who's, like, in it, we're all in it at the same time. But it's been cool to hear different people's takes on it, because everybody sort of has a similar there's a similarity on one level, but then there's, like, more unique takes, and I find those really interesting.
Agreed. And I wanted to say, yeah, congratulations on starting Stir Crazy.
Thanks, man.
That's Steve's podcast. You've got, like, 4 or 5, maybe 6 episodes out now.
I did 5 so
Oh,
far,
okay.
and I'm finding, because I did a bunch of interviews that first week, like a couple days after the lockdown started. I had, like, maybe a day into it, I had nights like, I should just talk to people and record it and see what comes out. But I think because of the rapid rate at which the situation has changed and evolved, I have to remind people that some of these were done, like, around March 24th, and now it's April 17th, and things are different, like the stuff people are talking about, like, there's a death toll in the US that was not what it was when I started it, and just the day-to-day stuff that people are trying to, sort of. I mean, I'm not watching the news more than once a day now. I just try to pick a time where I think enough information is there that isn't people just speculating. I try not to get caught up in the minutia, and I try to just find the facts. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot more things at stake. Like, I did a couple interviews this week, and they'll probably won't be out for a couple weeks. But people in the music community, like, one of the people I interviewed is this really great. He's a composer, but he's also a bass player. This guy named Adam Dorn, and Adam was really tight with Hal Wilner, who just passed away from coronavirus.
Oh, wow.
I think he was like 64. But Hal was the one that he did that show Night Music. Like, he put together all those things and
Yeah.
did stuff with SNL, and produced a bunch of records that a lot of my friends had played on and stuff. So it's it's definitely within our community and stuff. And then, bands that we know, like I
Yeah.
know Testament and Death Angel were on tour. Some of those guys got sick, man. I think they're okay,
It's
Gary.
interesting. There's a reasonable amount of people that like seem to think that they are either recently sick, and or haven't been sure because of not being able to get tested, but it's like some of the symptoms. But then a lot of people that were like in December and January, February, before we actually kind of even were aware of the whole thing, that they got super deathly sick, and they think, oh, looking back, I think I might have been dealing with COVID like back then, because it was
Yeah,
abnormally intense flu-like symptoms, right? So,
yeah,
but as everybody's been saying, it's a really strange thing how some people get it intense and some people don't, and it would seem that it has to do with underlying preconditions, right? Like some people are predisposed to uh, have to take on this virus in a kind of crazy way because they're already at a deficit on some level through their natural immunity or
mm,
genetic disposition. And then some people just like, I was sick for a minute, and then they're done, which is strange scenario. We're in new territory with the whole thing, it seems like.
yeah. It's really hard to fathom,
Have you
and I guess in a weird way, like I lived in New York for 13 years before I came out here. So I moved here like 3 years ago, and I'm just thinking about how vulnerable a place like New York is to a thing like that, just because of you're dealing with a condensed landscape, and things are really close together, and it's nightmares to consider. Like the one thing about LA I think that's sort of been interesting is it's the sprawling nature of it maybe has made it a little bit safer. But it was weird at NAM, and I'm not trying to perpetuate any kind of like tinfoil hat stuff, but I heard from people who were kind of reputable that someone had gotten sick in Hall E. And this wasn't like some ghost story Hall E type stuff. Like
really?
someone had gotten sick from Hall E, and like they had to go to the hospital. And I remember hearing it, but nobody was really throwing around the term coronavirus or COVID-19, even though I know it was in the news at that point, because it was it wasn't like front page news, but it was maybe a sidebar, like this thing happening in Wuhan.
Hmm.
All I know is that I still have hand sanitizer thanks to Dan Electro, or no, D'Angelico. They had this bowl of like tiny hand sanitizers. I took 2 of them because I
Nice.
think I was trying not to get the dreaded Namthrax, which I've never gotten before. But
Oof.
in between every interaction, like I just would put some on my hand, and I I still have some in my car, so that's what I've been sort of doing every time I go out and like buy something or put gas in my car.
Sure.
Which
You're lucky guy to not have gotten the Namthrax. I want to step back though. You're talking about the nature of the cities and stuff, and one of my favorite tracks off of yours is actually called "Leave the City Before You Can't."
oh, thanks, man. Yeah,
And I was like looking at that again this morning, like that's kind of appropriate at the moment for
yeah,
our current times,
yeah.
because that's actually been kind of like the question. I mean, I only moved to LA just barely even a year ago. Been
Bay,
working down,
right?
yeah, from the Bay. Yeah, I was in North Bay, Santa Rosa area when I was working for Dunlop. But it's interesting. I was thinking about moving to New York because I love both cities for different reasons. But then I went out to a trip. I did another work trip to New York, and it's like, no, I don't think this West Coast Cali boy can handle this really. Like, it's
Yeah,
cool to visit, but I don't know if I could really like adapt. I have to be much younger. And then, but then the fear has always kind of been like major disaster of some kind. And LA is not equipped. I mean, like trying to get out of here during an earthquake or post earthquake of any real magnitude, that's going to be a strange scenario. Or who knows what other possible natural disasters could
right.
affect a scenario like that. So I'm part of me is like, do I take this opportunity to move to Vegas or something? Like,
Yeah,
like cheaper? I don't know.
yeah. New York, you're not really going anywhere because, um, I had a vehicle when I moved there for a while because I moved. I was living in Boston before all that, and then I had a car for a while, and then having a car is expensive there just for parking reasons, and it's not even so much that as much as it's just like if you don't want to pay for a parking spot, you can make it work, but you have to move the car a couple days a week. And I think it might be like that here if you don't have a parking situation at like your house or apartment. But it was the kind of thing where I felt weird freedom by having a vehicle. Like I could drive and get out of there, but then it's like you see what traffic does every day, and it's like there's no way there. Like the quickest way out is probably the subway or the train, and even that, if something happens, that's going to be completely overrun. So it's kind of like escape from the island and swim to New Jersey. Like that's probably
Yeah.
it's probably what most people would do, or not. They just hunker down and wait. I was there for Hurricane Sandy, and that was probably the closest thing. It wasn't the same as like a pandemic, but it was the kind of thing where there was a period of time for a couple weeks where the supply chain was disrupted because of like damage to some of the routes the trucks would take or something. There was a point where
Mm-hmm.
there were lines to fill up your car, like for people that had cars, like because I lived in Brooklyn, so I was close to like Fourth Ave, and there would be like this long stream of cars or people carrying like gas cans, and it
Wow.
didn't look as Mad Max because it was the winter time, so it was more gray and stuff, but it was definitely a bizarre thing. There was probably like a 2-3 week period where people just kind of stayed in their area. I didn't go to Manhattan for a long time, or at least for like a few weeks, because it was things weren't up and running yet. There was like an entire section shut down with power issues. And
Did you deal with any power outages yourself?
no, I guess the thing that was cool about where I lived was like I found out because of Hurricane Sandy, there's different elevation zones for New York and Brooklyn, and like the parts that really got hurt by the storm are very close to the water. So like the Rockaways and places like that are further out in Brooklyn. But I was living kind of in an elevated area in terms of the elevation. So somehow like I skated by. I didn't have any issues. It would like, thank God. I mean, but it was an interesting thing because that's one of those things where nobody wanted that. Nobody really expected there to be any kind of fallout like that, because that area, I mean, I guess hurricanes can happen, like, that's been a thing, but it's also something like of that scale doing that kind of damage was unprecedented. Like I have a buddy that lost a house, and he lives in the Jersey Shore area. It's like just
Yeah.
stuff that no one really foresaw. So much like this thing we're in now, it's like people just had to like play where the ball lands, and
Mm-hmm.
hopefully no one gets hurt in the process. But yeah, I don't think there were gigs happening at all. Like it was a very it was like a smaller period of time and with a foreseeable end. Like it was a very easy thing to understand. This is harder because I think you're watching people that know about this stuff saying we're not sure. And I think
Right. That is tough. And I think you kind of touched on it earlier that to the degree it's like we're swinging between a holy shit, everything's not the same, and well, everything kind of almost feels the same.
Yeah.
Like it's like, well, which is it? If it would almost be easier if it was just an outright like everybody shut their doors and stay inside, and like it's almost it is, or if it's, or is it like okay to go outside? But it's not a clear cut thing, and because there's um some kind of discrepancy on what method and what the timing is, and down to like what kills the virus, what doesn't kill the virus, and all this stuff, and we're still sorting it out. That it's just a time of unrest, and it's a time of like not knowing, right? And I think that it's strangely a good time for us to wake up, though, because when you're a little uncomfortable and you don't know what's going on, there's this opportunity for being roughed up a little bit and for growth to happen, right? The more comfortable we are, the more kind of soft we get, because like I know I can go get another loaf of bread. I know I can get mayonnaise, dude. It's cool. Like, I'm not stressed. Toilet paper. Yeah, I'll just go get some more.
Yeah.
But we all of a sudden found ourselves in a place where that wasn't the case, and in that, and we have to like be forced to use like these kind of critical thinking, faculties that haven't necessarily been exercised in this way. At the same time, we have a barrage of media that doesn't necessarily always have our best interest, in play. So it's like, I don't even know who would you point to anybody that you feel like you get a solid like reporting from? Like, are you getting your news and media from somebody in particular, or are you just kind of doing a conglomerate? Like, what's your way of going about that?
Well, for this stuff specifically, I trust Fauci because he hasn't, whether he talks to somebody on Fox or I mean, he's been making the rounds, like he was on the Desus and Mero show, which I really think is hilarious. And, but his he hasn't wavered with anything he said. And so, cause like they're like Fox, for example, they say horrendous things on there, but they have moments where they have people on there that kind of like, no, this is what it is. And even some of the people that have shows, like, I don't know, it's a weird thing, but I just think there's a lot of noise in general with news. And so it's like, for me, I found that the BBC, like their website, that's what I listened to a lot during the Bush era and post 9/11, because I felt like there's an inherent wave of just speculation and talking about things, but that's not necessarily the news, like the news to me is like, here are some facts, this is what happened. I'm not telling you how I feel about it. I'm just telling you this is what happened. These are the facts. And so I think like that's the part that I think is missing, because everything is so polarized in a way that shouldn't be, because since we're talking about a health thing, which could affect anybody, and it doesn't matter who you vote for or like any of that, this affects everybody, so it's like, I think that's the potential danger with the way news has been set up, and the 24-hour news cycle is not really that healthy. Now, I think if people like to hear people's opinions and that's comforting to them, like, that's a different thing. But I know for me, I don't necessarily care about that, and I don't need it to be filtered through comedy all the time. Like, I know some people really like The Daily Show, and when Colbert had his like Colbert Report, like that was a really big thing, and I enjoyed it sometimes. But a lot of the times, I just wanted to hear, okay, what's going on? Like, what's the real fact here? And then if I want to hear what someone who might be like really smart has to say about it, or someone that like has a perspective that might be at least interesting to listen to, that'd be cool. But it's never. I feel like the line between opinion or just people speculating on things, that's a very big difference than like the news, and so I feel like that, and especially right now with just the fact that there's such a reliance on people kind of being aware of their surroundings. I don't know. I think we're lucky to have people like a guy like Fauci who can just talk about it. But it sucks when you're not totally sure if there's more to it. Like that's like, what are they not saying?
Right.
I'm very inclined, by the way, to not believe much of anything. Like I wouldn't say I'm a conspiracy theorist, but I would say I'm like, if there's like a middle point between full out tinfoil hat and like I'm one of those people that it's like, hold on a second, like what's going on,
Yeah. Well, we are in alignment there, because I do like hearing about the conspiracy theories, though. Like, I have for a long time. Like, I want to hear what the fucking most far out thing, because I want to say thank you to the conspiracy people, because they're willing to draw crazy connect the dot like diagrams that nobody else is willing to try to even consider, right? Like, it's like we got to thank those guys for blue skying the potentialities of our impending doom, right? Like, now, because oftentimes inside those things there's two or three kernels of truth that, if had you not really looked into that kind of extreme viewpoint, you might not have considered at all.
Yeah.
Because like what you're saying, I mean, where we're at now with having so many of these things that, I mean, just in the last 20 years, and I'm not going to do a good job of like recanting these things, but or recounting them, but the concept of the things that everybody was like, no, that's not even a thing. You're a conspiracy theorist, so you're worried, man. And then 5-10 years goes, oh shit, yeah, that was a real thing. And like there were people that were like wanting to raise the signs on the end, on the streets to warn everybody of. They really are like wiretapping. They really are like they can tap in and watch and check out everything on your phone, like all
Yep.
your text messages, everything I mean, they could tap into this feed right now, even though it's not live, right? Like all that stuff is totally possible. And now we're here, we're definitely in a version of like 1984, but it's kind of this weird like acceptance thing. We're like, oh, it's been such an incremental thing, and then anytime there was a big hurdle to get over, there just seems to be a very convenient disaster that allows us to get over that kind of like civil liberties, or like, little hurdle, like where people are like, oh no, you know what, like I want to be safe, so like definitely take my rights, that'd be great.
Right.
And we just kind of keep rolling down that hill with that snowball. And so I'm not sure that, I mean, do you see any like end in sight in that, or do you think it's just going to kind of keep going?
I mean, I think there's blind spots with a lot of that stuff because on one hand, digital privacy is like a huge thing in terms of what it implies. Um, Even if like some of the data that you can learn from it is interesting. Like when they were talking about a couple weeks ago with the people who weren't leaving Daytona Beach, they could see on a map how many people were there because of cell phones.
Right.
And I mean, on one hand, that's an interesting thing. And I don't know to what extent they could pinpoint each user, but they probably could if they had the right clearance. But I think there's also micro blind spots that people don't always consider because, like with Google, for example, like I use Google Maps. I also know that it tracks when I'm using it in my vehicle. I know that Apple doesn't though, or I know that Apple, like that's a really strong distinction between Apple Maps and Google Maps.
Hmm.
It's like small things. It just depends on, because some people, if they're using something that's part of an ecosystem, like if you have a Gmail account and if you have a YouTube account, which is also Google, and then you're just like, well, screw it, I'll have the same account for my Google Maps, and that way I can look at something online and send the directions to my phone. My car, I have a Toyota. There's like an SOS button, and they can track me also. And I can turn that off, but I think there's all these things that there's maybe some good uses for them, but it doesn't take long to spin it and look at it from a nefarious, like from like a darker perspective. I don't really know if there's any way to totally get away from it because I think by having a cell phone at all, the portability thing and the way that they can find the way those signals sort of triangulate themselves, that's going to always leave it open to that other thing. But the other side of it is like I haven't had a landline in maybe like 20 years. So,
Right.
so I mean it's like a weird concession people make. We get a lot in return, like the connectivity parts and being able to send information and I think life moves a lot faster when you're connected to everything. And there's good and bad that comes with that. But I don't know if the cost is worth it in the end. I think we're also not far enough away from that because it is relatively new
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of ways. Like we're not 50 years in. I don't think we'll know until, you know, like long from now, you know?
Yeah, we're definitely in the beginning stages of something that I mean, and I will just say that, yeah, if in a perfect world, quote unquote, like all these things are useful and mostly good if they're all like, oh yeah, we're just making sure that you're not infected, and that you don't go around that person because we already know they have their medical records and they're infected. And if that were just kind of like, you know, easy and plain, then and there was a track record of our government and these agencies actually telling the truth
Yeah.
about shit, and like actually showing that they had our best interest in mind. Hey man, I'm all for it. Like I would like if they just if they just lied to us and just lied to us in a way that was consistent. You know what I mean? I hate to say this because I'm like now giving the machine like the kind of the energetic nudge, but like if you were just to, it's kind of like, here, maybe sounds unpopular, but like it's kind of like Obama. All right, it's um like Obama was a great spokesperson, man. He came out and he made us all feel good about the country for the most part, most of us, right? Not everybody.
Yeah.
A lot of racists weren't into it, a lot of like, staunch Republicans not into it. But for the most part, I think who I believe America mostly is as an entity, like made us feel good about him going out and being diplomatic with other leaders, and like the way he spoke. We're like, oh, like we know he's doing drone strikes, and he's has to have
Yeah.
some kids blood on his hands vicariously through all these different things,
Mm.
and he's a part of the system,
Yeah. Yeah.
but like, hey, if we could flip a switch right now and go back to Obama days, like there's no chance that we as a majority we wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
We would just be like, oh no, I was comfortable with that and I like the way he lied to me, and
Yeah.
kept it by omission almost a lot of the times,
Yeah, I mean that's the thing about having someone to I mean I can say this, like I know when Bush won a second term, I had just started to tour a lot overseas. And so a lot of people, sometimes politics would come up like post gig or whatever, and um a lot of the questions people would have would be they didn't understand like how would someone like that get reelected, and it's like, well, there's no historical precedent for a wartime president not being reelected, so there's that. I mean there's a lot to it. And then there's parts that are extremely baffling, like the election of 2000. But I know when Obama won, the how that kind of stuff would come up in conversation also. Like people were
Mm.
stoked in other countries that. So I mean, I think there's sort of like this weird banner of confidence depending on who's in charge. But yeah, there's definitely things that gig does not seem like a fun gig to have. It doesn't seem like there's definitely like man, I definitely feel like we were in a good place as a country in a lot of ways with Obama. It just seemed like a lot of the things were good. The economy was good. People were feeling good about like their jobs and what they were doing for the most part. I mean, I know there's definitely industries that are feeling the pinch, but these are also things that have long tails to them. And, it's like a lot of things are always facing the brink of extinction, and that's a tough thing to accept no matter what it is that you do. Like, there's alternative energy forms that are becoming more popular. Computers are becoming more powerful, and our artificial intelligence is definitely like become really powerful. So the idea of like self-driving cars threatening other industries is not something that really is that groundbreaking. But I think yeah, with anyone that comes along, like I remember a couple things about the Obama presidency and the beginning of it and what was leading up to it. So I was in New York City during the financial crisis, and I remember what that felt like. I remember like a lot of my students, because I was teaching a decent amount as much as I was playing, half my roster disappeared, and
Wow.
like I lost a lot of income, and I had to find something to do to make up that income. So I like had a part-time gig like walking dogs for like a year, man. And it was kind of not a bad side hustle, because it was like you're outside and it was like good exercise and probably 4 or 5 hours a day of just walking around. But I saw other people have like moving out of these really expensive apartments because their life kind of went belly up. And a lot of it was because of the stuff with like the subprime mortgages and just, you know, the whole thing that led to the financial crisis becoming an actual thing. And I know Obama and that stimulus package with all the people that worked on it, that really helped be a stopgap, and he saved the auto industry in the United States. Like there's all these things that happened, but he also had a really strong brand. And I remember like way before the financial crisis, when the first kind of like wall-sized mural of his face, and it might have been like an adapted form of like Shepard Fairey's Hope poster, but you know, I was very well aware that this was a brand we were also being sold, you know? And so, I mean, there's that too. I think, you know, in a weird way, and I don't know that everyone's going to be able to see this, but all future presidencies, including this one that we're in now, whether you like how they branded it or not, and I certainly don't like it, but like that was so, you know, there was a marketable thing there, and that's not necessarily the way I think politics should be, but that's the thing. Like with everything that seems good from something, there's gonna be, you know, other iterations of it which may not be so good. So
it's
but
like
yeah,
we got.
oh,
Go ahead.
no, you're right, man. I think we accept certain blind spots with things, and you know, it doesn't, I don't know. Like I remember when the end of his term came, and you know, the interesting about Facebook is how many people from different parts of the world you can come into contact with and be friends with or be connected to. And I remember there was one of those like, share this if you're, you know, if you're gonna miss the Obamas, and you know, it's like, fuck yeah, I'm gonna miss the Obamas. But one of these dudes, I forget what country, he's like, well, he bombed the shit out of this and that, and I was like, you did that?
Yeah, he did that. You dude, like
not laughing at the bombing, but just laughing, you know, just being called out for like, you know.
Dude, but yeah, Obama, easily the best president in my lifetime, easily the most interesting one, the most street level, the one that I could relate to the most. The fact it was like the first time we really had a president that was he was the closest thing to cool that we could ever say, oh, that president, he was cool. Like he went on Jimmy Fallon and slow jammed the news. You know, like he got to hang with the roots. Like people like, and I don't know, he definitely fit into the culture, and I felt like he helped like get us to like a at least a ground zero with a presidency. Like he, you know, he at least he's, you know, modern and he felt fair and balanced, and I knew that he had to do all this other shit, but I still liked him, man. I still liked him, and I do miss him. And I liked his wife. I liked his kids. I'm one of the people that like I never really talked about it, but like I hate when people bash Michelle Obama, because I just think of all the people to bash and to like, and they're like, oh, is she a tranny? Is she this and all that? I'm like, dude, I think she's super beautiful, and I was super stoked that she was like a strong, confident, happy, healthy person by, you know, standing by this guy's side. In direct contrast, like we just got the exact opposite. the next go around, we're like, whoa, this is I don't know what this is, but okay.
Yeah, it's interesting how it all unfolded. you know, I mean, I don't know if I'm older than you, but like, I remember when Clinton was the first
43.
president I was aware of, huh?
43.
Okay, I'm 44.
Yeah.
So I think Clinton was the first time I think they tried to make the president cool. You know, like he played sax on Arsenio Hall.
True. True.
And like MTV was starting to get into the game. Like MTV was still kind of like, it was occupying the role that the internet occupies now, or, you know, but much more so because that was the only place you could really get everything. So I remember they had that show where it was like kind of like a town hall, but with like young people, and they asked him if he like had ever smoked weed, and that whole famous "I did but I didn't inhale" thing came out. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember that.
Yeah. So I mean, that seemed cool. I mean, that seemed to. But I also feel like that type of framing a candidate comes at a price. You know, and I think that's the thing. And I guess the way I look at a lot of this stuff now is like, if you think about something that's done in the service of like people's lives, like I always think about it in terms of like, and not in a diminutive way at all, but like people that pick up the trash and recycling. Like, I don't know these people. They're probably cool, or maybe they're not, but like I know they do their job the way they're supposed to. And I don't have any narrative about, would that person be cool to have a beer with or like talk about sports with, like, and I kind of feel like we need to get back to that with our elected officials, you know,
Right.
because the character purity test thing, it's tricky, you know, it's a deceptive mechanism, because I think everyone wants to humanize it, but I don't know, I think that's the sword we all kind of fall on sometimes.
It's a good point. It's not something that any one of us is going to do a good job at passing this purity test. If anybody was to go and be a representative, and you had to be held accountable to some puritanical list of ways of being, and the fact that we kind of soft hand this, you know, religion and politic thing in America all the time anyway, it's like it's a strange scenario. Like what I hear you saying, I think, is that it would be better, we'd be better off if we just went by like their resume and the facts. Like, can they do their job? Did they get anything done? They didn't get anything done. They have no experience. Sorry. Next. Sorry. Next. Oh, you ran a TV show and you're an asshole. Great. Next. Anyway, so like, you know, like these type of things, this would be common sense ways of going about it. But what we have is, you know, billions of dollars in, well, probably trillions of dollars ultimately in our politics, you know. And I think that's just where it kind of goes wrong. It just goes wrong. Like, people can get bought, and dark money can be put into all these different elections in all these different ways. And as long as that is the scenario, then we always have to be on our toes, and we are always going to have to kind of go, oh, good news. Oh, wait, let me just think about that for a second. Is that good news? Is that, oh, really bad news? Wait, okay, wait a second. Is that really bad news? Is that even real? Like, every time I hear something that's kind of shocking or slightly alarming or like eye catching, I'm like, oh, what the, wait, that's do I have the time to research this right now? Because, you know, like, I'm not, you know, either I'm going to engage it or I'm going to let it go, to let somebody else figure it out. But
politics is the only realm where this happens, because, you know, in art, especially in music and film, I mean, not going to talk specifically about it, but there's like there's terrible people that make great artwork, and it's like, you know, there's terrible people that have made records that the world loves. I mean, not everybody, but like there's you know, like there, and so I feel like people can somehow, for the most part, I think there's exceptions, right? Like I don't know if everyone, you know, it's like people's personal stuff. If you can separate the art from the artist, I think it should be the same with political stuff. Maybe that's a weird way to rationalize what's happening now too. I see the other end of that, but I ultimately think when people are trying to select something based on relatability, I don't think that has anything to do with the job that they do. And I guess that's the thing, there's a yin and yang to that. And Maybe
Right.
I'm thinking about the good side of that yin and not using it as a way to rationalize like shitty people doing the thing. But I think that's if you can put it, if you just look at what the work is and assess it for that and not worry about, I don't know. It's a weird thing, man. I mean, it works the same way, I think, but I also think it's tricky. I think that's the trickiest thing about all this is like there's a lot of projecting from
Jeez.
like
Yeah. Well, projection with billions of dollars behind it too. Like,
yeah,
like that's this billion, like it's just endless. But I digress on that subject for the moment though, because I
yeah,
do want to ask you a couple other
yeah.
questions.
We can pivot, man.
It's all good. But I appreciate that you can go so easily in that direction, because I haven't really had anybody recently that felt that fluid. But I want to ask you, because I know yeah, you're an amazing bass player that's in
Oh,
demand.
thanks, man.
And like like it was cool that I think when we first met, I must have met you at Dunlop, like when you came to do a video for us up there
Right, yeah, for
for one of the cool pedals or something.
the sub-octave bass fuzz, yeah.
Yeah. But like you're primarily, and most bass players do, only play with their fingers, but you use picks and every now and again, right?
Yeah, yep.
And what kind is that you have there? Is that a Tortex?
It's a Tortex. It's like the 88 millimeter.
Okay, so normally it'd be green.
Yeah,
You have a special black one with your logo on it.
black and silver, yeah.
And could you give me some little history on where your relationship with plectrums and guitar picks of any kind began, um, and like what is the use? What would you say the main primary way to use that tool in your world? Where does it come in handy?
Well, when I originally started playing bass, I was playing with a pick.
Really?
And it was probably the first couple months, like that was how I learned, that's how I got around. That was the only real technical way I knew how to execute stuff. I was like 13, I think. And uh, basically I was at a music store playing something and some guy came up to me and I don't know who this person was. And he wasn't like a notable player or anything like that, but he played bass and he was like, you should also learn how to play with your fingers. And you should definitely like consider like all the different sounds. Like it wasn't one of those, I mean, I think he kind of was one of those guys that was like, you're not really a bass player if you play with a pick, but it was more diplomatic the way he said it. It was more like you should have as many sounds available to you since you're young and you're kind of new at this, like you should do both. And so, and then the first teacher I ever had, he didn't care about playing with a pick. He's like, you play however you want, just have good time and like learn harmony and like work on your rhythm. And he's like, it doesn't matter what technique you use. These are just the things that you have to do to be a good musician. And so there was never really I never really felt like that argument about like the anti-pick thing. I think is stupid.
Mm.
I always felt that way, and I think for me, I really wanted to get better at it because I did spend most of the 90s and probably like a good chunk of the 2000s just playing with my fingers only, and then like sometimes I'd mess around with a pick and I play some guitar, so I'd use a pick for that, but like I think once I realized that there's just sounds I can't get any other way than with a pick, and a lot of the rock stuff and metal stuff that I really enjoyed listening to had bass players that played with the picks, and I wanted to get good at that sound. Like I wanted to learn how to, like, if I got called upon to do anything like that, I wanted to be able to come correct with it. And so, and then, it's like weird, I'd heard Bobby Vega, and then I checked out some Carol Kay stuff where she's playing with a pick, and then all the obvious people like Chris Squire and, even some of the ways people would play with their thumb but use it like a pick, like the more aggressive funk guys, and even people like Bernardo Edwards from Chic, from Chic. I don't know, man. I think it just became something that was like a sound I wanted to employ. And I think, I also heard like Marcus Miller use that sound with a pick on
Hmm.
some David Sanborn records, where it's like he's not doing the muted thumb thing. Like he's literally like playing with a pick, because you can hear the attack. It's a bright stainless steel sounding bass string sound, but it's muted with a pick. I thought that sounded funky as hell. And then even like Randy Jackson, when he played on those Journey records in the later part of the 80s, like when they had there's that weird moment where Steve Perry had a solo record, and then Journey
Yeah.
made another record, and he got rid of Ross Valerie and Steve Smith. So it was like Randy Jackson was on that Raised on Radio album. And I know he's playing with a pick on some of it. I just thought it sounded awesome, man. And then Anthony Jackson. So it kind of, when a guy like Anthony Jackson plays bass with a pick a good chunk of the time or some of the time, anyone that's going to say anything about picks being like not as valid, like that's where they just lost me.
I think you
But
just validated, like, by naming like all the greatest players that ever used a pick on a
yeah,
bass.
yeah.
Uh, did
But even
did
like
Jamerson use a little bit too?
what's that?
Was Jamerson a bit of a pick user too? James Jamerson?
I don't think so, but I think because I think he just kind of used his two fingers together like a hook
Oh,
kind of thing, and but I think his rationale for that approach was about consistency, and
mm,
so I feel like that, the spirit of like maybe the necessity to have a consistent sound. Also, like I don't know exactly what kind of gear they were using at Hitsville, but I would imagine they didn't have the Waves plug-in bundle. Like, there was like all these like compressors. Like it was pretty much like finding the most consistent thing that was going to work and like have the right presence in the tracks as they recorded them. So I think a lot of it just comes down to just being practical. Like there's just certain things that sound practical, and it's like even with metal stuff. Um, like I'm not exactly sure how authentic this is, or whether or not it was someone that just played on this stuff. But whoever's playing bass on the Injustice for All stuff, where the bass is super loud, like, have you heard this? Where like, I mean, to me, that shit sounds incredible. I think some of it is Newstead. Like there's like versions of it floating around.
oh, like a remix of Injustice,
Yeah,
but
like
it's the original bass tracks.
I think so. Like I think it came from like the Rock Band game that was like the Metallica edition. And dude, his sound on that, is massive. I mean, of course, like on the Black Album too, but like you just hear what that sound does to like the sound of the band,
Mm-hmm.
and it works really well with funk. So yeah, I came around to it because I just feel like there's a sound that you can only get using that technique and using a pick. And I'm not as proficient at it as I am with my fingers by any means, but I'm at the point where I could do an entire gig playing with a pick, and it would probably be okay.
That's dope, though. I mean, I think the pick playing with a bass is definitely, in my mind, mostly for rock and metal. Like, but even though there's plenty of rock and metal guys that won't use it, but that's
Yeah,
like kind of where I came in contact with it the most. It was as I kind of delved into players, like when I was first starting and working at Ampeg, and I was like, oh, whoa, like, yeah, okay, bass players mostly don't play with picks, and some of them, and there's this little click where some of them are like, bro, you play with a pick, you can just fuck off, like like, and I always like thought that was like an interesting. I'm like, oh, I feel bad for these guys, man. They can't use a cool tool that like
yeah,
obviously would tighten their game up if they were doing some gallops.
yeah,
Uh, but that's cool. That's cool that you retained it. It's cool that you actually started there, and you had that person that didn't sway you hard one way, but kind of hipped you to the fact that, okay, yeah, you need to use the fingers too, and you didn't lose sight of using the pick as a tool for doing the right thing, using it for where it makes sense.
Yeah, I don't have a really strong dogmatic thing when it comes to playing or how to play or how many strings. Like I know what works for me, but like I don't have a real for me it starts and ends with just what it's going to do for the sound and what it's going to do for like the sound of the band, you know, because a lot of times like that's it. Like if you're dealing with drums that are going to be super loud or the way they're tuned, it's going to kind of infringe on like the bass guitar frequencies, and then you're playing with like guitars that might also have somehow like they're going into your space sonically also. The pick is like the best way to sort of marry those two elements, I think. But yeah, I don't know, it's I never really saw it as like a, I don't know, it's just to me it's just another way of playing, it's another color. um I've always been pretty mesmerized by people that can get around really well with it, though. Like, I don't remember I'm embarrassed. I should know this because I'm a huge Prince fan. But on the Sign of the Times concert, they play an instrumental, like they play the Charlie Parker song "Now's the Time," and the guy playing bass, I think it's Levi, but I'm not sure, man. And
Mm.
I haven't seen it in a while, but he takes an awesome solo, man, and he's playing with a pick, and he's like shredding, like it's, you know, it sounds
Oh.
awesome. So I don't know, man. I think it's, I don't think so much about it personally because my stance on it is like by any means necessary. Like if it sounds right, that's it. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that um when I was a younger player I would have never thought I would do with music. Like I have a P bass. I don't play it all the time. It's not my main axe, but I love it, you know. It wasn't,
Mhm.
you know, I'd say I'm more of a jazz bass person, but I like having a P bass. I like flat wounds. I don't use them all the time, but I like them because it's just another sound. I don't know. I feel like the real dogmatic things that younger musicians say or allowed to say is like kind of stupid. Um, like I remember kind of also like turning my head at like people would. I remember like there's a couple me and my little friends and we were like kind of really getting into playing bass and like I think I'd started listening to a lot of fusion stuff and progressive rock, but I think the one thing that was interesting is like when I was in high school, a lot of the really awesome bands had good bass players. You know, like Fishbone and Red Hot Chili Peppers. You had Norwood and Flea,
Hell
and then
yeah.
you know Infectious Grooves. You had Rob. So it wasn't like bass players sucked in the '90s. It was like anything but that. But I don't know, man. It's like I even people that were trying to say, well, you know, Duff McKagan plays with a pick. I was like, yeah, but you can listen to the Guns N' Roses song on the shittiest AM radio, and you can hear the bass part to Sweet Child of Mine like a mile away because he's playing a melody. So I don't know, man, and I don't. Who knows what it would have sounded like if he played it with his fingers, you know?
Right, right.
You know, I'm not on a song like that where someone can hear that, you know, like we all want to be in that position. There's not a lot of people that have played a part like that.
Right.
Even amongst the great sea of musicians that are out there, there's very few who get a part like that on a record. So yeah, I don't know, man. It, that's a real simple argument for me. It's just whatever works.
Yeah, man, I like your style by any means necessary.
Yeah,
Get the job done, right? Use the right tool for the right job, and don't get dogmatic about it. I know that the dogmatic thing is for young people. It's like more so for young people and for people that maybe insecure with their playing or where they're at as a player, because they want to fit into a certain niche or a certain thing. I know for me, just as a music connoisseur as a young age, I was so into like all the progressive metal. And I remember I was working at Tower Records in Chico, California. It's kind of my home, my area. And it was like my third place I've been working, and they gave me a metal. So they let me curate a metal section. Most Tower Records wouldn't do that; just kind of put it into pop rock. But
right.
my boss was like, "Yeah, man, you're a metalhead. Like, get to it. Like, order some cool esoteric shit, and then like, you know, school people when they come in." And I was like, "That's my jam. I'm super into that." Like, and
Yeah,
people come in, "Hey, can I get some Metallica?" I'm like, "Yeah, you could. Or how about some Dillinger Escape Plan? Like, how about
right.
that? Let's talk about our Lord and Savior, Dillinger Escape Plan. Like, it's just like, I was very kind of, man, if you don't know who Candiria is, like, I don't even want to talk to you. Like, for a little while, I was like, just kind of, they're from Brooklyn, man. They put hip hop and death metal and jazz all in the same song, and you can't handle it. And because it was kind of that snooty kind of way of being, and I got off on it and for a good while, and that was like 21 to like 23 or something like that. I just kind of felt that way about things, but then as I matured, as I really started to open up to I liked all kinds of music at the same time. It's funny because I would say those things and be that way a little bit, while also like listening to Al Di Meola and listening to like all kinds of different genre stuff. But I just kind of had it with pop, for a while. I was just like, it's got to be, it's too easy. That would be easy to write that simple little loop. I would always say that would be easy.
Yeah.
And then it was like, I remember being kind of faced with jamming with a group of people, and they're like, hey, just like let's do a simple thing like here. And I was like, I don't really have any ideas for that. Like maybe that's harder than I think it is, and that kind of started cracking me open. I was like, oh, okay. So the young person in me was pretty naive and,
right.
dumb
Yeah,
about
there's records I definitely didn't like as a younger person that I came around to at a certain point. Like I remember when Hysteria came out by Def Leppard, I was like, because at that point I started listening to Master of Puppets and Rain and Blood, and there was also like a lot of hip hop stuff. Like I checked out Public Enemy, so I was like 12 or 13, so that was like I was into angry shit, man. But I really liked Pyromania, and I really liked High and Dry. Like one of my best friend, like he loved Def Leppard. So when Hysteria came out, I'm like, I don't like this, man. Like they don't sound angry at all, man. Like, and then years later, I love that record, man. Like I get it. I understand what they were doing with it. Like the songwriting's great, the production, it's weird, but I like it. It's a really good album. It took a long time for me to like get to that place with it, but one day I like listened to it. I was like, yeah, this is cool. I like this.
It's funny. This is the Def Leppard thing. As a kid, I remember I had there was a couple of girls in my neighborhood that were super into Def Leppard, and they're like, Joey Elliott, he's so fine. Oh my God. And I don't know what grade. We were close in age, so I don't know. I was probably with Hysteria. I want to say like maybe 6th grade or something, or some 5th or 6th grade, somewhere close to like that. So I was just barely kind of getting into girls and trying to like halfway be cool, and which that never happened ever. But I just remember, and my parents were very Christian, right? Like at the time, and they're just trying to make me go to church, and I would come at home and like want to turn the radio on and try to listen to rock, whatever the local Z rock, type thing was. But they're like, oh, can't you listen to Christian music, and I'm like, that we'll take you to the Christian music video store. You can buy some Christian rock, and I was like, okay, yeah, So I remember going to somebody like at church or something, like said, oh, like you like Def Leppard, and I was like, yeah. Well, they're not praising the Lord, but if this band Stryper, they're like a Christian Def Leppard.
Wow.
So, dude, like somebody sold me the album To Hell with the Devil, and then in Yellow and Black Attack or something like. And so here I was at home trying to like kind of convince the cute girls down the street. I'm like, hey, listen to Stryper with me. It didn't go over well. They were like, there's no Joey Elliott in Stryper, dude. Sorry.
Yeah.
He's the hot like front guy, so it was a funny thing.
Yeah. I it's weird, man. Like I remember that whole period of time when that seemed to be like the most dangerous music, and it's really silly, man. Like I remember like just, my parents never cared about that, by the way, like because I grew up, I'm Jewish, and so like the whole thing about like the devil being like the scariest thing, that wasn't really, I didn't grow up with that. But like I think I showed my dad, I didn't own this record, but I think we were at a record store, and I think I showed him a Wasp album cover, and he laughed at it. Like he just thought it was like ridiculous. He wasn't like, oh, don't listen to it. He just thought it was funny.
It's amazing because
Yeah.
the funny thing about it happen to me because and my little brother too is like our parents would say, oh, you that's like of the world, that's the devil or whatever, we'd kind of get this and they'd say that and we're like, okay, so let's go listen to Kiss and Wasp then, like, because like we would just you're telling us we have to hide our heavy metal and rock and hip hop from you. Okay, got it. Like you can buy me the thing from the Christian place, but like then we're just gonna go run off and go do our own things. Like when we find nudie mags, like we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna listen to like
Yeah.
Leppard, and we're gonna listen to Rat. We're gonna listen to Cinderella, Beastie Boys, whatever, back in the day. So it kind of had the reverse effect in a way, where if they would have just said, "Oh, that's funny," we probably been like, "It's not cool enough. It's not pissing our parents off. We got to go find something cooler."
Yeah.
I'm going to become a Christian now. You can't stop me.
Yeah. My dad took the piss out of Wasp, man. That's what happened. Like I didn't really, I don't know. I kind of saw for a minute what he was laughing at. I was like, yeah, it is pretty funny.
So what can you give me, like, do you have like a top 3 all-time bass players influencers for yourself?
I mean, it's weird because like when I was younger, I mean, it would be real easy to. I would say like for me, the big ones were like Geddy Lee. I was a huge Rush. I still am like a huge Rush fan.
Hell yeah.
That because Rush was really the gateway for me finding my way into fusion and jazz. And then from there, I got way into like funk. Like I wanted to sort of get into all the different elements. So like initially it's like, okay, let's find all the stuff where there's a combination of these things. Fusion made a lot of sense because, it was like jazz mixed with funk, mixed with rock. So, but then it's like, well, I want to hear what the meters sound like. I want to hear what Parliament sounds like. I want to hear what James Brown sounds like. But then, okay, I want to hear what Miles Davis sounds like. I want to hear what John Coltrane sounds like. Miles like before he went electric. So I feel like the ethos of a band like Rush, where it's like we're just gonna do what we want and make our own shit, and it doesn't sound like anything else, and it's gonna pull from all these things like that, had a really profound influence on the way I thought about playing and the idea of just being really good at your instrument. So then I got into Jocko, like all the bass players seem to get into, and like because he's an amazing, not even just as a bass player, but as a composer, and just for someone just to have a musical concept that broad, like listening to something like Portrait of Tracy and then someone saying, that's just one guy playing an electric bass. I mean, that made my head explode. And it still kind of does, man. Cause it's like, I think a lot of people can, I mean, like the facility of what can be done on bass has evolved a lot since those records came out. But in terms of scope and concept, I mean, not really. That's still very much like at the forefront of what people look at when they want to really be inspired and hear like a true original voice. Prince was a huge influence on me. Like once I realized he played bass on a lot of stuff, like that turned my head on my side. Like I couldn't believe that, like I remember the first time someone told me, I think I was like 15 and we were listening to The Time, and that song 777-9311 came on, and I was like, who's playing bass on that? And my friend was like, that's Prince.
Dude.
Get out of here. And so I think that sort of drew me in. But then, there was a lot of people like O'Teal. He was a big influence. I saw Aquarium Rescue Unit my first year in college, and they were opening up for, well, basically I didn't know who they were playing with on the bill. My friend, like it was 1993, it was the fall of 1993, and a bunch of my friends were like, oh dude, you got to come with me to watch this band. This is like Victor Wooten's favorite bass player. I was like, well, that dude's got to be amazing. I hadn't even heard these guys, so I didn't know who Jimmy Herring was. I didn't know about Jeff Sipe as a drummer.
Sure.
So we go in to this place, and this is a club in Boston called the Paradise Rock Club. And the first band, there's like a big ass drum kit. There's like a dude playing saxophone, a dude playing violin, and like a guy playing bass, and then a guy playing like a Chet Atkins Gibson guitar, and it was Dave Matthews Band. Never heard of Dave Matthews Band. Like they went on first. I don't believe that they were opening for ARU, but I think maybe they decided they were going to go on first. There were a ton of like females at this show, and I believe Dave probably had his college following at this point, because I think their first like Under the Table and Dreaming came out a few months later. So he was definitely like, that was definitely his crowd. But then they played, Carter left his drum kit up, and then Colonel Bruce Hampton and ARU played, and O'Teal came out, and you know, he just did the stuff that he does, and that blew me away. So I really liked him. I still really love his playing. I don't know, but I think, but like the initial ones as a kid, it was like Prince, Geddy Lee, and Jocko. But you know, the very first bass influence was probably Gene Simmons. Like that was probably, but it wasn't so much about him being a bass player as much as being 3 or 4 and seeing Kiss do stuff. It just felt very close to like Star Wars and other stuff at that time. It's like, these guys do cool shit and they're musicians, you know.
Dude, they're Kiss. To be honest, I'm not a fan. All right, like I'm not actually a fan of Kiss, but as a young person, Kiss ruled, because I was like, those guys are definitely rock stars.
Yeah,
Like, they're spaceship, futuristic. Like as a young person, I would see that. My brother felt the same way, and as we got older, we're like, it's funny that we actually ever listened to that band, because I mean, I know there are a couple of tunes that we're into. Like I just never got into it like some people, like, oh dude, Kiss is the thing. I'm like, not as soon as I like understood what Metallica and Pantera were, like Kiss were definitely obsolete, you know.
right.
But the essence of the thing, like they inspired so much kind of like imagination around what it meant to be on the stage in the center of attention, and to have like very distinct roles in the band. Like, oh, this guy's got this, you know, makeup. This guy's got this outfit with this instrument. And so, you know, they were larger than life in that respect, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I could make a strong case for at least like their first album through maybe Alive 2. You know, like you know, I've always been a pretty big fan, but it's also, I also know it's very, very deeply connected to being a kid. You know,
Totally.
much like Star Wars and stuff like that. So I love it, but it's like there's definitely, I feel like my kid goggles are going on when I listen to it. But I think that's the beauty of that kind of thing, is like it kind of takes you back to when you were, you know, maybe a little more naive to the whole thing. And
100%. If Star Wars came out today, I don't think I'd be a fan the way I am. You know, I like going back, and it's a good comparison too, I think, because nostalgic wise, when I watch the first trilogy and revisit that stuff, I'm like, man, this, it wouldn't be that cool if it didn't happen when I was a kid. It
yeah,
just, you know, and now, I think part of, not completely, but part of the disparaging comments and like the letdown of the older people that are involved in the Star Wars fandom has to do, I think, with the fact that, hey man, these movies were a little corny. They came out in the late 70s, early 80s,
right,
and to try to continue in that vein, the new movies are going to be like a little bit like that too. Like they're kind of supposed to be a little corny here, a little bit there, you know, otherwise they're not Star Wars,
right.
you know.
Yeah, it's weird. People expected, you know, people expected it to be the way it was when they were 9, and that there's really nothing that does that. You
When you
know,
were 9, that was like Star Wars was a serious space time opera. Like
right?
you took that kind of seriously, like verbatim a little bit.
Yeah,
Can't do that anymore. Like that's,
yeah.
yeah.
I remember being in 3rd grade when Return of the Jedi came out, and I remember thinking
Oh.
how badass it was. But then I didn't realize that there were fans that didn't like Return of the Jedi. They're like, man, this is some kid shit, man. You know, like, you know.
Dude, I love Return of the Jedi. I
Yeah,
still, I think Empire Strikes Back is, you know, technically a better, maybe the best film out of
yeah,
all of them in a way.
yeah,
But I was the same thing. I saw Return of the Jedi in the theater, and I was like, dude, the green lightsaber and the Ewoks, dude.
Yeah,
Yes, the answer is yes. He had a robotic hand. Like, I
yeah.
was all about it. It freaked me out so much that I was like, I think I was even lying. I remember telling lies to other kids on the playground about Luke Skywalker's my dad. Did you know that? Did you know? Yeah. I'm in training to be a Jedi. Like I'm this like second or third grade, right? Saying stupid shit, getting in trouble.
Yeah. That's what people did.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to ask what are you getting into these days as far as listening wise? Like, is there anything new or just something that you can't like shake that you just like feel like is super catchy and you're involved with? Could you name off a couple of artists or a couple albums that we should check out?
Well, I've been a really big fan of Car Bomb, and when they put out this record called Mordial, which came out I think in September. Like I love those guys.
Jesus, dude, what a great record.
Yeah. Um, I'm trying to think of what else I've been listening to. I go through phases where I'll revisit stuff that, um, I guess albums that were important to me at some point, but like just, like there's a cyclical nature to why I'll listen to them. So I've been like listening to Frank Zappa a little bit more.
Hmm.
Um,
Any
like
particular album?
One Size Fits All.
Oh yeah.
Um, I've been listening to, trying to think of who else. Oh, the new Code Orange. That's a cool record.
Oh, I don't know that.
Cool like metal band. I don't know. There's probably a better genre. Let me see. I can tell you who else I've been listening to. I'm pulling it up. Oh, you know what, man? Two people in the span of a few weeks. Like I had Brian Beller on my podcast, and I asked him what he was listening to, and he mentioned these guys. And then one of my good friends who I hadn't talked to in a while mentioned these guys. I've been checking out Big Wreck. You know what I mean? Like it took me forever to get into them, but
Dude.
like I'm the last guy to get on that train, but I love them, man.
Well, so you're on that latest record then?
Yeah.
So I mean, I love that whole catalog, and I was a little late, kind of officially late to them too. Strangely enough, I had been listening. I'd found Ian's other band, Thornley.
Mm-hmm.
I'd found that band probably I guess that must have been 2009-ish or something like that. Somebody had passed it to me, and I didn't know it was related to Big Wreck, and I didn't really know anything about Big Wreck, but over the years, I had always listened to that Thornley record. There was a couple of really great hooky, like he's got great production on the guitars and everything. It was kind of like his 90s kind of vibe thing. And then fast forward, I was at Dunlop, and my buddy Mark Tremino calls in and talked to me one day, and it's like, hey man, you know who you should get on Dunlop stuff, man, is you need to call up and find out who's managing Big Wreck and Ian Thornley. That guy plays your slides, he plays your picks.
Yeah.
Like what a crazy musician, and the band's great too. And I was like, yeah, okay. So I like put him on a list, and it was like not but a week or two later that Ian's girl, all of a sudden, like who was kind of part of the management and record label, called in like, hey, I'm just calling on behalf of Big Wreck and Ian Thornley, and I was like, wanted to work something. I was like, I was gonna call you, yeah, and whatever, I got a chance to make a relationship with Ian and the band, and we did the Dunlop sessions with him. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I went like I fell down a deep rabbit hole.
Cool.
It was like one of those things where it's like, I want to, that's maybe what's cool about where things are with technology. You can do that. You can kind of like figure out like, okay, how did I, because that's one of those bands when I heard it, it's like, how did I miss this?
Yeah. Especially with a vocalist and who is a guitar player of that caliber. It's kind of unprecedented. It's one of those real rare moments where it's not uncommon to have a great vocalist be somebody that can songwrite, and can play some guitar.
Yeah.
But to have a dude that's tall, handsome, play like just somebody that has the full package, and he's kind of, some say like he's like a Canadian Chris Cornell, blah blah blah, because he's close in the range or whatever. But Wow. I'm enamored with his playing. Is like he's and such a like an easygoing guy that like if you get a chance to hang or jam with him, you guys should jam. That would be sick.
That'd be fun, man. You know what's weird is like those guys apparently were in Boston the same time that I was. Like they
Oh.
were, because I think they started, maybe not Big Rec so much, but those guys were at Berklee College of Music in like 94. I was there in 1994. There was
Oh.
like a lot of interesting people kind of in the city in Boston at that time anyway. But yeah, no, so it's like I wonder if you know, like I don't remember ever seeing them play, or if there was an iteration of that band that that might have been doing stuff. It's hard to know that those types of things, but yeah, it's always weird to realize like, shit, did I know any of these guys, or were any of these guys in my classes and I just didn't, nobody knows who anybody is at that point.
That is a interesting. I love how sometimes you do find out. You're like, oh, wait a second, I was in that same class. I was doing the same thing. Oh, wait, you sat in the corner. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
That latest record though, But for the Sun, I kind of hastily put together a best of record list. I usually do it each year or whatever, or just stuff that I can remember. And sometimes I'm too stoned and I hastily put it together and I accidentally left this record off, which is so dumb because it is literally one of my most favorite records of last year. I think from start to finish, not only is the band just so on point, but like Ian just really plays his ass off and sings, and the vocal. I like everything about that record. I think it's a perfect record, especially for a band that's been around so long and not gotten enough due in the United States and elsewhere. I mean, they're great in Canada. Everybody, they're royalty there, but I'm glad you brought them up, man. That's a really good one.
Yeah. Those guys are awesome. And then I guess besides those people I mentioned, New Thundercat I really like. Steve's one of my favorite bass players, and I've always liked what he's done. There's always like a couple really great songs on those records consistently, and I also I always like listening to Flying Lotus and stuff, so like I always feel like there's like they have that universe together, which is pretty cool.
Same. That the New Thundercat record, top shelf. I think it's as good or better than all the stuff he's done a little bit. I mean, and I was just talking about this with Jose Rios on the pod yesterday. He's with the Anderson .Paak and the Free Nationals guys, right? He brought up Thundercat too, and I was like, man, like I remember when Thundercat kind of first jumped out on his own, and I was kind of like, okay, yeah, I mean, like the playing's good. I'm not sure if I don't know if I can handle. I don't know if this is good or not. I couldn't officially tell because it was so fresh, and he had just created. He just came out with his own sound. He's like, no, check it out. I got this whipping ass, like cool, like super nerdy outside bass stuff married with this kind of laid back neo soul thing and real long, big, soft, reverby vocal. I'm like, wait, what? It was a combo I hadn't really considered, And so when somebody does something for the first time, it can be polarizing, right? Like you remember, this is another cool little topic to breach, is that can you remember an album or a sound that you heard at first and you're like, no, fuck this, not into it, nope. And then like you hear it like the third or fifth time, you're like, oh wait, I get it now. I'm in. I said fuck this at first, but now it's Thundercat I wasn't quite like fuck this, but I was like, I'm not so sure. I think he's cool. But then the second album came out, and then like the Fly Low stuff, I kind of got deeper into his thing, his lexicon. I understood him better, and it kind of clicked for me.
Yeah.
Do you have somebody like that?
Yeah, Radiohead. Because I remember when the song Creep came out, was like 92, 93. And I remember hearing that first record too. Like one of my friends had it, and I didn't really think that much about it. I didn't hate it. Like it wasn't like it wasn't like a strong aversion to it. I just didn't care for it. And then I remember when the Bends came out, only because some of the songs like Fake Plastic Trees and High and Dry, like those songs were on the radio. So I didn't know these were Radiohead songs, even though now that I think about it, it had all the elements that would easily identify them as Radiohead songs. But I just remember feeling like these are awesome songs. And then I remember when OK Computer came out, and I like that was the record that sort of like injected me into that band as like a fan. You know, I was just like, man, this record is great. But it's almost like those 3 songs weren't enough to pull me in. Like I just thought, okay, these are cool. But OK Computer, I think because maybe it was a thing a lot of people were talking about, and I felt cool just like checking it out. Like, you know, because I think I listened to half of it at Tower. Like I think, remember the listening stations where you just walk up, and I remember I used to, like, because Tower for me, and probably for a lot of people, kind of was the physical embodiment of what YouTube is. You know, as far as like checking out music. So you'd walk around, there'd be like 8 of these things, and you'd see what was there, and it was kind of a cool way to like lift the veil on an album you wanted to hear but maybe weren't ready to pull the trigger on. And I just remember like I put on OK Computer, and I stood there for like a half an hour, man, and I bought it. Like, you know, but it was like I couldn't stop listening to it. And so, but yeah, I guess what I'm saying is like the songs I heard from other records prior to that, like it wasn't enough to make me want to buy them. And then I kind of came back around. It's like, you know, the Benz is cool, and but yeah, I was kind of a slow burn with that band, definitely.
I kind of did a similar thing with them. I actually, because I felt like those first 3 records was because it was the first one, Pablo Honey, then it was it Benz was second one,
I think the Benz was second,
and then OK Computer, and then Kid A, right? And I think the first 3 kind of like, I was like, yeah, cool band. Never listened to a full record and like was like, yeah, I'm a Radiohead guy. Like, no, that's, you know, a lot of the tunes were okay. And I was like, cool, man. They're not, you know, not thinking this at the time, but like they kind of fit into the 90s lexicon with those records, you know, being alternated with like Soul Asylum and all these other different kind of bands that were popular at the time. But then when Kid A came out, I'd stopped everything I was doing. I was like, oh wait, the Radiohead just changed the fucking game. Like that completely changed my perspective on recording. I was like, okay, there's been interesting things that have happened in the world, but now this is like maybe the most interesting to me right now.
Yeah.
It just flipped me completely. And I was like, okay, I'm a fan. And then retrospectively from there, I was like, okay, I can go back, I can go forward. But to me, the defining moment in Radiohead is Kid A. I mean, that's probably not an unpopular opinion, but
no, I agree. I think there was like 3 albums, sort of in that time period too, that I think a lot of musicians really were affected by. Like there was Kid A, there was Voodoo by D'Angelo, and then Post by Bjork. Like all 3 of those records, I think really made musicians kind of stop and think. And then low key, I don't know how many people would cop to this, but Chaosphere by Meshuggah. I feel like those 4 albums, every musician who's playing now that is into like interesting music probably knows all 4 of those records, I would guess.
That's so I wouldn't have guessed that you would have put Bjork in there or Chaosphere, but I will say that all 4 of those records definitely had a major impact on me. D'Angelo, kind of in the background at the time, I didn't like buy the record, but I had a boss at a different record store that was just in love with D'Angelo, so we listened to it all the time. It's like I didn't need to buy it because I was like, shit, I go to store and we're going to listen to it, you know. But
yeah,
that's a good point. And what an interesting time too. I just like, you make me kind of like nostalgic for the record store feelings, you know. Like I still go buy vinyl. I got a record player and stuff, and I'm into it's streaming and vinyl for me. But you know, it's funny because like I pine after the feeling of being in the record store and like kind of wasting a few hours like looking around and like sorting through, because that used to be the thing. I used to do a lot of buying on intuition. I don't know if you did I mean, we kind of had to some degree, but like, it was kind of like this really sweet, like, sensitivity that you got to. You're like, oh, okay, the album artwork's good. Okay, so you're like, before the listening stations were super prevalent, especially, you would flip through, or if it wasn't in a listening, not because not everything's in a listening station. So you'd be like, you have to kind of weigh it out. Okay, they called it this. I think, I can tell these players are on it. Whatever, like, and you kind of guesstimate, like, with your best guttural instinct. Okay, I'm gonna put $15.99 on this motherfucker right here. You get home, like, damn, there's like one tune on it. There's like one fucking tune.
Yeah.
Anybody else want this shit? I'm gonna like trade it off. Like, it's like, I remember the days of just trying to be like, oh, and then, but the flip side is when you got something that was dope and everything was in alignment, like your chakras like tuned that day for whatever reason, drank the right amount of coffee, right amount of water, got a right amount of smiles, mom hugged you or something, and you're like, I'm gonna take this home. And it was the thing. And it was the D'Angelo album that, you didn't even know was the D'Angelo album that was going to be the sick thing or whatever. Man, the payoff was so huge.
Yeah.
So huge.
There's definitely things I misfired on, man, and just didn't have the proper introduction to. Like, when I was kind of in that period, like as a 7th grader, when all I wanted to hear was like metal and stuff, like I didn't have any friends that listened to the Grateful Dead. So there was nobody there to tell me that, like, in spite of the fact that there's skulls and shit in their artwork, they are not a metal band. And I bought something and I just was like, what the fuck is this, man? Like, what is this shit? So that kind of ruined them for me. I'm not like a big fan now, but I get the allure, and I definitely feel like those guys are cool players. And, I've heard stuff that I've really liked. But initially, for a long time, it was like, man, fuck those guys, just from
I just had my brother is younger, a couple years younger than me, and he is like a punk kid, and really into like kind of like the 90s and like Bay Area crust punk and all kinds of different things. But I didn't really know anything about Grateful Dead except for like the one tune on MTV that was with the Skeletons, and like it was the Touch of Grey or something, right?
Yeah.
And I knew that one thing, but like everybody in my world, my brother and his friends were like, fucking hippies, stupid Grateful Dead. And I remember when Jerry Garcia died, and my brother was like, fuck yeah. He's like, the king of the hippies is gone. Like, but he was like, he wouldn't be that way today, but he's much more sensitive and kind. But like in his earlier years, I was like, and he influenced me in all these weird ways because he was so confident about stuff. And I was like, okay, I guess it's trash music because, because my brother's cool, and like I want to be cool, half as cool as my brother. So
I think I was a good player, man. I mean, that's the one thing. It's like, even if you didn't like that band or whatever, it's like Jared was a good player, man. I mean, there's no real like way around that. But yeah, my thing with bands like that too. There's other bands of that ilk I wouldn't say I'm a fan of, but I have friends that are. So I guess now what I try to do is like, I want to hear it through their ears. So it's like, okay, show me like what I should play, something for me that's like, that you think is good that I should hear. So I, cause like, I don't know where to start.
Right. I like that approach. Yeah. Give me your top shelf cuts. Yeah. So I can be introduced into this in the best possible way.
Yeah, not even as like a challenge as much as just, I'm curious as to what I should listen to. And I feel like it's easier to appreciate stuff that way than to just sort of, it's easy to write certain things off, but I don't feel as inclined to do so because, there's things that like over time, like just they change, or things hit you differently when you get older, which is, like I think that's the thing. I mean, when you're a younger person, music is sort of like your identity, you use it as a way it's a tribal thing. So
100%.
So it's like, if you let that govern everything, there's a lot of stuff that wouldn't get through the door. But now it's like, I don't know, like I look back at a lot of the music I listened to when I had maybe the most ignorant and strongest opinions about stuff. And I don't know, like some of it, I have like a couple of rational opinions, like about like some people's like involvement with people like I'm a big Jakey Lee fan. I'm not going to tell you where I think he sits in the pantheon of Aussie guitar players, but I would say he's really up there for me. Like, I think, that
Sure.
dude wrote some great shit, um,
100%.
but I don't have like I'm not one of those people that wants to be like, that dude's the best. And, like, I don't feel like that. But I just, I don't know.
I did the whole identity wrapping up into, with music thing too. I mean, like Pantera, when I found Pantera and I really ingested it, it kind of became my religion for like X amount of years. Like and that was part of my blind spot. What you focus on ends up, creating your blind spot to some degree, right? Like, like all your focus is over here and you can't see anything else. And it's actually part of like one of my favorite like blind spots was that we had a Swedish exchange student in high school. His name was Klaus, of course. And we were all, driving around the back roads of Corning and Chico, getting stoned and listening to Pantera pretty much nonstop. Like, and he would jump in with us and go out and we'd park by the creek and, we'd be listening to any number of Pantera tunes. And one day he was like, man, he's like, we could listen to something else sometimes, like there's this band from Sweden called Meshuggah. We were like, yeah, but we were listening to Pantera. He's like, but this band is like technically like better. And we were like, what? Like we were already offended. Like me especially, because it was my car. I'm one driving around. It's my tape deck.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, no, here. And he passes up this copy of Destroy, Erase, Improve.
Right.
And this is like 93.
Yeah.
And and we were like, all right, buddy, we'll give it a shot. And we put it in. And like it was completely lost on us. Like we got through like maybe halfway through that first song or maybe through the first song. And we're just like, yeah, I mean, but it's the fact that it, like he had said it was better than Pantera or like I don't know, I forget exactly how he said it, but it kind of pissed us off. And we're like, yeah, whatever, dude. It's not the beats aren't connecting right, dude. Like these guys need to learn how to play better. Like our thought process was so like removed from what they were offering, And so like I ejected it, but he left the tape in my car. And it was probably a month or so later, here I am like kind of bored of listening to Pantera. And I'm like, yeah, maybe I'll give that another shot. I put it in. And about a song in, I was like, oh, wait, there's something magical here. And I felt like such an asshole, like such a dick. I was like, man, okay.
Yeah.
Meshuggah really is the next level. I don't want to say they're better. They're a different thing,
Yeah. It's a different strain.
Different, yeah.
I mean, I heard them pretty early on in college. I have a friend, he used to really, I mean, he isn't playing full time anymore, but he ended up playing bass in this band called OTEP. This guy,
Yeah.
Evil J, Evil J?
I don't know him, but I know the band. Yeah.
Yeah. So Jay and I like were at Berkeley at the same time. And I remember I was walking by his room and he was listening to something and the guitar player sounded like Alan Holdsworth. And I was like, what is this, dude? And he's like, oh, it's this band Meshuggah. They're from Sweden. And I think he had like the Nun EP or something. Like it was one of the ones where they had like a purple logo. It wasn't Destroy, Erase, Improve, but it was one of the early pressing, like because he was into death metal and he like got me into Cynic and stuff like that. Like that was the dude that kind of hit me to, because he knew I was into fusion stuff and he was like, you might like these guys, check these guys out. But so that, I heard them kind of like mid 90s before, I don't know, I was an early adopter, like as far as like, people in the States,
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we've seen it took them maybe 20 years to get there, but like the future of at least guitar playing, I mean, they were the ones that built that whole thing, man.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a genre that they're not thrilled that they spawn, like, or just, like,
it's,
I.
It's like any great messiah, any great enlightened one that comes along and utters forth words of wisdom. They usually say, "Don't go making a religion about this." All
Right.
right, this is just
Right.
the way I like to do it. And everybody's so enamored with it. They're like, "Amazing! So now Jesus Christ, we're gonna make Christianity. Oh, amazing, Buddha, we're gonna make Buddhism. Amazing, Meshuggah, we're gonna make Gent."
Right.
You fucking retards! That's not how it's supposed to go.
Yeah.
But we can't help it. Like that's I remember the wave of Pantera, styled stuff. That's the interesting thing, though. I will say I feel like Meshuggah has far surpassed Pantera in the overall influence, mostly because they're still around and making records, right? I think in that respect, but because they were more futuristic, and they felt they had longer legs in that, whereas Pantera kind of in its own way had a little bit of more of a shelf life. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, I mean, I think also the elements in that band in Pantera were more combustible, just like the relations between the Abbotts and maybe like the other guys. But
Good point.
yeah, I mean, I think Meshuggah kind of they future-proofed themselves a lot by sort of going in a different direction. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I like a lot of the bands that came out after them, and I love Extended Range as far as like the way it sounds on guitar. I think it's cool, but I think like the bands that really have a concept that go outside that. I feel like Car Bomb is the first one. Maybe Car Bomb and Gojira, and I don't really know if Gojira, if those guys were like Meshuggah fans or not, but I feel like Gojira and Car Bomb, to me anyway, like I hear new shit in that music that is
Yeah.
sort of like unique. It's a really weird, hard style of music probably to just come out of left field and have something different. But with Meshuggah, I think the other thing that they really kind of changed, and I feel like Pantera had this element too. A lot of their stuff's very minimal, like
Yes.
they have a lot of firepower, and like those guys can blaze, but there's enough space for everything that you're not distracted by this guy's doing this, or it's very well put together as far as where stuff occurs.
It's
And I
kind of an
think
antithesis to some of the quick thrash, where thrash is like dig, 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 like kind of filling up a lot of space and always riffing, where Pantera and Meshuggah in their own ways and subsequent bands, like you said, minimalized and put more space into the scenario while still allowing for shreddy moments and all that, but kind of almost it's like it's more contrast. Maybe that's more dynamic, more contrast.
yeah.
That's cool. Well, dude, we're almost at the 2-hour mark.
Oh, cool. Yeah, man.
That's pretty good. It's gone by pretty quick, pretty easy. You got any live streams or any gigs or anything that you're doing from home that we should plug or anything? Because
I have a True Fire course that dropped the beginning of March called Modern Funk Bass, and that's basically it's stuff that's based around playing busier grooves, but also playing more minimalist things. And I talk about different ways to articulate different types of things, like using the left hand to be expressive with pull-offs and stuff. It's all that course is rooted in being like a functional bass player. There's not a lot of like crazy technique or anything. It's mostly, some of the examples are challenging, but it's based around wanting to just help people develop their groove, with busier grooves, and then how to like think about space and stuff like that. I'm teaching Skype lessons. I am going to do some live streaming, but I haven't worked out my set yet. So I'm sort of in the process of figuring out how I would do it, because I've been working on a lot of music and I've been practicing a lot, but I was able to secure one of those iRig streams, but I'm trying to figure out like what I would do and like how, and I think we'll be in this for a while. So I don't know that like there's any rush to go out there and do it, but yeah, I'm getting itching to play. I think the last gig I played was the one I saw you at was like with Mark Letary.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think that's the second to last gig I think I was at. I think the last one I was at was Intronaut, like a week
Oh
or so
wow.
after. Yeah, it was weird because both that gig that I saw you at with Mark, I remember showing up and kind of feeling like, do I shake hands with you? Like, are we? Oh, I think we're good. Like, and like everybody kind of, did the thing, and then I got to the Intronaut show, and everybody's like,
Everyone's like,
are we hugging? Are we doing the elbow thing? And
right.
it was like still strange, and then it was like right after that, everybody's like, yo, dude, nobody's going out doing it. Like, because the next show was going to be the Animals gig. And that all, I think Gavin or whatever, that gig was all the last one. When that one got canceled, we all kind of said, oh, okay, everything's canceling now.
Yeah. I've seen Javier. He's my neighbor. So like
Oh, cool.
I'll go for a walk sometimes. And like one time I walked past his place and I can see him sometimes when he's like working or like, I like just because of where his apartment is.
Yeah.
And so I got his attention and like we chatted for a minute. I've known him a really long time.
He's one of my favorite dudes.
Yeah, he's a good guy. But yeah, he was telling me about that. Like just just everybody's kind of figuring out what to do while stuff gets sorted. But I think at this point, like if someone was like, hey dude, like we got this gig, it's at a festival, like I wouldn't take it right now. I don't think anybody, we gotta like get to the point where people like I joked about this, but I really think once you can take doing something for granted, then that's when it's at a safe place again. And so I think
Right.
Unfortunately there's so many industries that are like kind of waiting for all this stuff to run its course or find a way. We got to find a way to meet it some way and like work around it. But I think it's going to be a minute before the live music thing comes back. And it's better if we do wait it out because nobody wants to go to a show and get sick or whatever. And those guys don't want to get sick. And yeah, man, it sucks. And I hope that everybody can, stay in their most positive mindset while this is happening. Because the other weird irony is that you're healthier if you are positive.
Correct.
You're less susceptible to getting sick. So it's like, even though like sometimes it's hard to see around some stuff and you want to like, harp on the dark stuff. And I definitely have those moments. And I've had those moments with this. It's like, you got to remember that stress and negativity, even if you're not a spiritual person, those can affect your immune system. So hopefully people are watching a lot of funny shit and they're, keeping themselves mellow.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's interesting to remember that whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. Like you're either whether you're positive or you're negative, you're going to be you're in the business of self-fulfilling prophecy. Like each one of us, which is it's an interesting game, right? Because it's like the moment that, especially for those that are predisposed to chronic depression and chronic like negativity, they're self-fulfilling their own scenario because, well, it's probably not going to work out. Fuck, my life's shit. Well, you're right. Sadly, and like sadly, you're right. I mean, you're right because based on your perception of it, it's quite literally your point of view. How you see it is how it's going to manifest in front of you, or at least feel colored or projected as. So as you're saying, it's if we can. It's kind of that, like a pulling up by your own bootstraps, which is basically impossible. But it's that thing of like, can you push through the urge to talk shit on everything and call it in this negative way, and can you find the things that you're grateful for? And I know that this is a little bit cliche, but there's a lot of really good things will come from like once a day. Oftentimes early in the day, if you can stop and just think of 3 things that you're grateful for, like I'm grateful that I have a house, that I'm warm, I feel sheltered, I have food to eat, I have toilet paper. I mean, dude, woo, it's a win, like I like that. Today is going to be okay. I can eat and I can shit it out and I can clean myself that's
Right.
a good day.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes that's enough.
Yeah, it's the simple things, but at the same time, obviously, it's all relative, but uh, yeah, I think we if we can stay positive, if we can stay in connection to others too, like even I think this is actually a really positive scenario that we're encroaching upon, is having I just the other day I had a 420 hang on Zoom. It's like, hey, text a
Right.
bunch of, I'm like, yo, dude, it's like 5 minutes, like get on Zoom now so that we can hang out. And I got like 6 people on, and like a couple people in North California, Vegas, and Bay Area and around LA, just popping on and just hanging out and telling stories about what's going on with them. And I figure, like if nothing else, at least like we get to hear a story, we feel heard, and we have a little bit of something to look forward to. I think that's super positive. So
Yeah, totally, man.
well, dude, thanks again. I appreciate your time, and everybody go check out. Tell me again, what was this? It was a Surefire lesson program. We go to surefire.com, or
yeah, truefire.com. Or if they want to go to my website, stevejenkinsbase.com. That's got links to everything. Podcast, the True Fire stuff, music, the whole nine.
yeah, definitely
All
check out
social.
cool. We'll check out stevejenkins.com. We'll check out the podcast Stir Crazy.
Cool. stevejenkinsbase.com.
stevejenkinsbase.com.
Yeah, there's another guy that has that domain, and he and I have clashed over the years.
Dude, you need to get the one that's the real Steve Jenkins. Like.
Yeah, I thought about that.
Well, dude. Anyway, I mean, again, I appreciate it. It's been a great couple hours, and let's stay in touch. And if there's anything I can do for you during the process, man, hit me up.
Awesome, man. Likewise. Thank you.